Welcome to the Training Your Leaders for the Long Haul webinar. Let's talk about how to effectively train leaders. Now, most of us, we use meetings as a format to train leaders. Why do we use meetings? Well, we learned in meetings. We had college and seminary classes that were essentially meetings, conferences and workshops that are meetings, sitting in rows. That's how we learn things. But we believe in circles, right? So why do meetings often not work? Well, we have scheduling conflicts. Our leaders, are various places at various times. We can't get everybody together at the same time. Our leaders are busy. They don't have a lot of time available. They have families, they have jobs, they have commuting to do, all of that stuff. The travel time to and from the church in order to do the meeting. They have to get home, have dinner, do something with the kids, get to the church, go to a meeting, drive back home. It's quite a lot. Sometimes our topics are irrelevant. So if people come to a meeting and we're trying to train all different kinds of leaders, well, the reality is if we have experienced leaders and we have new leaders, we're going to default toward training the new leaders and appeal to the least common denominator. And because of this, the more experienced leaders are going to get bored because they're going to feel like the training's not for them. Why? Because the training's not for them. That's why. We offer the same training to all of our leaders, like I just said, and some are going to get bored, some are going to feel left out. And so meetings are not the best way to train and develop our leaders. And the reality is people hate meetings. And that's a huge learning. When I was new into all of this and I would have meetings and sometimes I'd have a few people, very rarely would I have nearly all of them. But there were times I would have meetings and because of the day of the week or the weather or whatever, I would be standing there right after the meeting time had begun, in an empty meeting room all by myself, questioning the call of God in my life. So meetings are hard. People hate meetings. So how do we train them if we can't get them to a meeting? Well, you can get them to some meetings, but how do we train them? Well, for those of you, let's go this way. Meetings do not necessarily equal training. And so sometimes we feel like, we need to have a pattern of meetings, of weekly meetings or monthly meetings or whatever to keep our leaders going. Meetings don't always equal training. So first of all, if you don't have a topic, if you don't have a hot topic to teach about, don't have a meeting. If there's no urgent need, there's nothing that your leaders really, really have to have, then don't have a meeting. If you are having a meeting just because you're in a habit of having meetings, because you're supposed to have meetings, because they taught you in seminary that you needed to have meetings, don't have a meeting. People learn by imitation, not by instruction. That's not original with me. I got that from Mike Breen. People learn by imitation, not by instruction, especially adult learners. So why is it we train and train and train and train people, and then when they get in a situation, they don't follow what we trained them to do? Well, it's because of this. People learn by imitation, not by instruction. So don't fail your leaders with unnecessary meetings. I'll say that again. Don't fail your leaders with unnecessary meetings. But how do you train them? Well, we're going to get to that in a minute. But right now, I want to introduce myself. If we haven't met, my name is Alan White. I have worked in group life for nearly 30 years. I've coached over 1,500 churches in various forms and fashion. My wife and I have been married, 19 years this year. And we have 4 children. The youngest is 5, the oldest is 17. So our house is very lively. We have a lot of fun. I'm an author, I'm a writer, a producer, I coach, I mentioned. I write it over at alanwhite.org. On the screen is my first book, Exponential Groups, I published with Hendrickson Publishers a couple of years ago now. And just got a green light on a workbook to go along with the book to help people get a little more into it. So that'll be out probably next year. But anyway, I'm excited about that, so I wanted to mention it. Let's talk about why we do training the way that we do, or what training we should offer. I think all of our leaders, as they're starting out, and by starting out, if you're doing a church-wide campaign and you're giving leaders a trial run, this is not the first thing that you do. You give them some kind of a briefing to get them started. But at some point, you want to offer them some sort of centralized basic training. So you're going to start all of your leaders in the same place. They're going to understand, what it means to lead a group in your particular church. Now, there's some things that are going to be common with all churches that are going to be based on the Bible, based on common practices of groups, but then there are going to be some specific things that are relative to how you do groups in your particular church. You want to give leaders the basics of group life, how to run a meeting, how to facilitate, how to, manage group dynamics, some of these sorts of things, not heavy amount, but enough to get them started. Now, what I would recommend, and I have not developed a resource. In fact, I'm going to tell you the resource that I've used over the years is the Small Group Leadership Training Kit from Steve Gladen. And Steve Gladen is the small group pastor at Saddleback Church. He's been there for 20 years. And he developed this kit that has the PowerPoint presentations, the transcripts, the audios, the outline, the presenter notebook, the participant notebook, all in a package. And then the great thing is you can take this and customize it to however you want to do it in your church. And if you're interested in this resource, I don't sell it, but you can go over to Steve's website, which is smallgroups.net, and it's available there in the resources. So you need to have some sort of centralized basic training where all the groups are going to get their start. If you have groups that have been meeting for a while, they probably have figured this out. But your new groups, this is a good place for them to start when they're ready. I backed down to only having 2 meetings per year. And the reason is I was overtaxing people with meetings. There are other things that you can do that will supplement training. We're going to get into that. That's why you're on this webinar. But I only did 2 meetings a year. The first meeting I did was always ahead of a big fall launch. So whether we were doing an alignment series or a church-wide campaign, we would do this big fall launch, and we'd have some kind of food. I would give my leaders the first look at the curriculum. Our senior pastor would usually come and cast vision for the year, cast vision for where the church was headed, talk about the series, some of those kinds of things. It was more of a launch party than a meeting, but we offered the things that were necessary to get everybody started, get everybody going as we were heading into the new year. And you want to do this about a month out of your launch. And I know working with churches, some have launched as early as the second week in August, and others have launched as late as the second week in October. But about a month out, you want to have this kind of a meeting with your leaders. The other meeting that I would do was we would do an annual retreat, and we would usually do it right after the new year. I found that getting very specific, that the second weekend of January, right after New Year's, hotels had very low occupancy. You can get some really good rates. But I would bring in a speaker. I would usually budget to bring in a speaker. I would build some downtime into the schedule. And the reason for that was, when we were in California, I would take them over to Monterey. You see it in the picture there. And, for a couple to come over and get away, the kids are taken care of at home. It was kind of nice to get out and do stuff. And for anybody that, you go to a beautiful place, it's nice to have some downtime and relax, because people don't build a lot of that into their schedules anymore. I also built in time for leaders to connect with each other, because even though they're all leading small groups, they usually didn't know each other. And so I've done everything from, human bingo that we used to play back when you were in the youth group to just, sitting around a fireplace or a bonfire or, whatever else, just something kind of casual to begin the weekend, so that people could just kind of get to know each other, have some food there, those sorts of things. My leaders typically would pay. So I'd get a great rate on rooms somewhere. They would pay for their lodging. They would pay for some of their meals. I would budget for the few meals that we provided and budget for the speaker as well. And you think, well, I don't know, some leaders aren't going to want to do this. Well, the reality is that I had a couple that the last retreat I did at our church in California, they said that they were talking to each other that night, And it's good when couples talk to each other. But anyway, um, I'm getting distracted. I'm distracting myself. That's terrible. But they were thinking back about how many times they had been to a retreat with me over on the coast. And this was their 7th year on the coast, paid their way. Now, I did find that, some people it would be good to budget for. In fact, the last retreat I did here in South Carolina, somebody had to cancel and they'd already paid. And, it was one of those things that if, the room was committed to, we had to pay for it. So they couldn't get out of that. But they said, hey, we can't go. The room's already paid for. So if you know of anybody that that could possibly go in our space, they could use our spot. They won't have to pay us anything. So I sent out an email to all of my small group leaders and I said, hey, the spot's opened up. It's already paid for. Come and get it. First come, first served. And I had 3 or 4, maybe 5 leaders that had emailed back and said, hey, we'd really love that opportunity if it's still available. Well, here's the thing. I'm no dummy. If I had 5 leaders that wanted to go to a retreat and the only thing that was holding them back was money, you bet I found money somewhere in my budget. So not just one couple could go and take the room that was available, but so that all 5 of them could go. I didn't widely advertise that. I usually ask them to pay something if they can't afford it. But this particular thing, I said, hey, this room's available. It's paid for. I had 5 that stepped up and said they wanted to do it. So why wouldn't I have them come along? That just makes sense, doesn't it? What I found with the retreat is, and why I believe in this, is that the training sticks. That I would have leaders that would 6 months after a retreat be able to articulate back specific things that they had learned on the retreat from the speaker 6 months later. And I'd never had any training that would stick like that. But I think because the training was set apart. We went away to a place we were focused on small groups, and then the training stuck a little bit in their head. The other thing that I did often when we would come back from a retreat is within a couple of weeks, I would set up a video camera on a Sunday morning. I'd schedule the leaders to come in 15-minute slots and have them come in and talk about a couple of the things that they learned while they were on the retreat, things that really stuck with them. Now, I did this for a couple of reasons. First reason was I wanted to show the other leaders what they had missed out on, because I wanted them to be able to, okay, we're going to do this the next year, we know. Because usually when you start out a retreat like this, you have to commit to doing it at least 3 years in a row in order for it to stick and to continue to go. So I wanted the other leaders to see what they'd missed out on. The other reason I did it was I wanted my senior pastor to see how much the leaders had learned, because I wanted to justify the expense in my budget. But it did stick and stuck with people for a long time afterwards. So I think retreats are a great way to train people. And you can do a lot. You can probably get a year's worth of training, so to speak, into a weekend. And it sticks with them. You also want to leverage technology. You could use things like Zoom, like I'm using now, or GoToMeeting. Here's an example of a recent meeting I was in. Conference lines, again, so that people don't have to have the travel time to the church. Conference lines are a great opportunity. Free conference call is still available out there. I've had training where I've started on campus. Like I trained a group of coaches once. We had one meeting on campus, and then the next 5 installments of the training we did at 8:30 at night on a conference line for 30 minutes. And people would gather on the line, we would do the training, and that was it. Now, Zoom, obviously, you can see each other. There's more of a connection. And I work with pastors all over the country, all over North America, sometimes different parts of the world that jump in. And we do video conference, and it works out great. But leverage technology in training your leaders. Because it does save travel time, childcare, some of these sorts of things that tend to bog us down and maybe prevent people from coming into the training. You could even have a training night that you could have different topics. And at 8:30, we're going to do this topic. And at 8:45, we're going to do this topic. At 9 o'clock, we're going to do this topic. And then they would jump in wherever the topic was relevant to them. Just an idea, not even in my notes. There we go. You want to push training out to your leaders. So this is how I started my blog. I took my leaders' questions and I would write a blog post take one of the questions, write a blog post about it, and send it out to my leaders every week. We had signed all of my leaders up on the blog feed. A podcast would be the same way. And podcasts may seem old school or difficult or whatever else, but the reality is one of the top technologies that are being pushed this year in the corporate world are people developing podcasts. And you think, man, podcasts seem old, but they're the hot thing right now. Create a video, and you want to keep it short, not like this video. But you want to do a 2-minute video, put it in an email, push it out to your leaders, or get all of your leaders to subscribe to a Vimeo channel or a YouTube channel where they're automatically going to get a notification about that video. But you want to push the training out to them. Don't expect them to go to a website. Don't expect them to go look up the training, because if that's your mindset, then you know what? AOL from 1995 called and they want their strategy back. It doesn't work anymore. Send them a text message. A lot of younger people, a lot of younger pastors that I work with, rather than having a phone conversation or a video conversation, they just want to text back and forth to get an answer when they need it. So text is a great strategy. I know there's some databases like Church Teams that have SMS built into the database, so you can text through the database. And I just mentioned Church Teams because Boyd is my friend and I like their database. But anyway, another effective way to push out training to your leaders. Use social media. So use Facebook or Slack or Instagram or whatever else is out there. Again, something that your leader is going to follow, a hashtag or a Facebook group or something where you could push training to them in a medium that they're already in. You don't need some specialized Christian thing that everybody has to sign up for, because that's too difficult. Just push it out to whatever they're already using. You want to put the training in front of your leaders. Instead of come get the training, you want to push it out to them front and center. For several years, I published a devotional blog, went out at 3 o'clock in the morning. And so no matter when our people were up, they had one waiting for them on their phone. And most of them read it on their phone first thing in the morning. Had more people that signed up to get a daily email with a devotional. More people signed up to get it on their phone than signed up to purchase a book. They would rather have it pushed out to them instead of, oh, where's that book? I gotta go find it. Other relevant training. We have a wide variety of leaders. And so we want to offer relevant training to them. We have different levels of skill and experience. And like I said, you don't want to leave the new ones behind, but you don't want to bore the ones that have experience. See, generalized leader training tends to focus on the new leaders. I mentioned this before. So how do you create relevant training? I have pastors that ask me, how do I get my leaders to come to my meetings? Why don't my leaders come to my meetings? And I say, well, the reason they don't come to your meetings is because your meetings are boring and irrelevant. And I say, how do you know my meetings are boring and irrelevant? They get all defensive. I said, because my leaders didn't come to my meetings because they were boring and irrelevant. So how do you create relevant training? You ask your leaders what they need. You ask them. You find out from the leaders what they need to have. How do you ask them? Well, first way to ask them would be to actually have a conversation with them. And so you would talk to them. I used to gather groups of about 5 leaders at a time, and I would schedule either a breakfast meeting, a coffee, a lunch meeting, an afternoon coffee, maybe an evening coffee or whatever. I took 1 week of the year. I had 5 events. Each of the 5 events would have 5 leaders total, any kind of leader. And we would meet together and we would just talk about what was going on in their groups. And very often, probably more often than not, the leaders responded to each other's questions rather than turning to me. I just sat there and took notes. And so I felt like after a while, my most valuable contribution was that I initiated the meeting and I picked up the check, and we'd budgeted for these meetings. But the value I got out of it was sitting there with my notebook and taking notes about what they were discussing, whether it was, what's a good study to do on forgiveness, or how are you handling childcare, or whatever else. And they solved a lot of their own problems. But what it did for me, this was not a replacement for coaching, because I'm going to talk about coaching in a minute. But what it did for me was it kept me in tune with what was going on with the small group ministry. And if there were things that I felt were relevant that all of our leaders, or a lot of leaders were asking that all of our leaders needed to know about, then I would certainly write a blog post at the time. That's why I wasn't doing videos at the time, but I would write a blog post and push that out to all of our leaders rather than pulling them in to some kind of a meeting. So have a conversation with your leaders. The other way to do it would be to send out a survey. So often when we did a church-wide campaign or an alignment series, we would send out a survey midway through. We'd ask, what's working, what's not working, what's next. Sometimes I would ask in a survey to leaders, give us a list of everyone who's participated in your group so far. And then I would usually ask them, what are the top 3 problems or issues that you're facing as a group leader? Then I would take this list, whether it was we have an overly talkative person in our group, or we have somebody in our group that has an issue that we don't know what to do with. How do you get group members to do their homework? All kinds of different questions that people would ask. And I would take these questions anonymously, and I would write a blog post about each of those. Nowadays, we do something different. We actually did this with the church where we had a whole list of 52, and that number is significant. We had 52 issues or questions from group leaders. And then we took about 25, 26 staff, coaches, experienced small group leaders, and each of them took 2 of the questions. We did a 2-minute video on each of the questions, and they created an outstanding training to push out 1 video each week for 52 weeks of the year. So we had a whole year's worth of training. And so, again, other people participated. It wasn't just the small group pastor or small group director. It was a lot of other voices, and maybe even some areas of expertise. What do you do with a couple in your group is going through a divorce? Or what if someone's lost a spouse? Or what if someone has been, received a harsh diagnosis? What if someone's having a financial problem? There's a lot of expertise in your church that can relate to training your leaders. And the 2 minutes at least can be a start. But as you're pushing out videos, well, what do you do? Well, you take their answers and you're going to blog, you're going to podcast, you're going to create the videos, you're going to send a text message, you're going to do social media like we just talked about. So creating short videos. This is my friend Micah Oder from Whitewater Crossing Christian Church in the Cincinnati area. You want your video to be 2 minutes. Use your phone. Use your computer, or find something better. Don't make this overly complicated. Right now, I'm using my computer. If I've done some with my phone, but you make sure the phone's stabilized and not shaking and having a jerky video. You're going to have to change your scene once in a while, because this setting's going to be okay for a while, and then I'm going to have to sit over there, and then I'm going to have to go somewhere else, because you're going to get tired of seeing the same setting all the time. Ask your group leaders, your coaches, your other staff to answer the questions. Upload to YouTube or to social media. Again, if you want them, YouTube, get them subscribed to the YouTube channel, or put the video in an email. You probably do a screenshot like I just did of Micah here, and then put the link so they know in the email that it's a video. And again, push it out to them. Don't expect them to come. Upload it to Facebook, upload it to social media. It probably doesn't matter that they come to your church's website, so you don't necessarily need to embed it in the website, but get it out to wherever they live in the internet world. Push it out to them. But what if it's the wrong video? Oh, now aren't we back to the same problem? Because we had the wrong topic in the meeting, which was irrelevant to the leaders, so they stopped coming. So what if we have the wrong topic in the video? Will they not watch it? Well, they may not watch it today. So you push out the video training. The leader isn't asking that question. So you want to archive your videos for future use. And then the leaders can access a web page, or they can access a channel, or if they have a question for their coach will say, oh, wait a minute. Our small group pastor made a video about that might help you, and send them the link to the video and push it out to them. Instead of, oh yeah, there's that page, go find the video on that. We want to help it. We want to put training in our leaders' hands. So back at our church in California, I actually bought 2 cases of this book called Making Small Groups Work by Henry Cloud and John Townsend. And I handed out a copy of this book to all of my small group leaders. And it's a great book. It's still relevant. It still would work today. I also wrote a book called Leading Healthy Groups, a guide for small group leaders. The basis of leading healthy groups are the questions that I answered for my small group leaders, and then that I blogged about. And then I added a lot of other new content to this, and then came out with this book last summer. This is available on my website. It's also available on Amazon if you want to pay more money. But it's available on my website, and I give a quantity discount if you want to buy a quantity of these. I don't know what Cloud and Townsend are doing. But anyway, so a couple of ideas. I've just put the resource in your leader's hands. And so then they can have a ready reference to look it up. Or at a minimum, give this to all of your coaches. So your coaches have that ready reference when a leader, has the need, has a question. But here is by far the best training that you can ever offer to your leaders. The best training, and I'm not joking, is the best training comes from the person who is the most proximate to the leader when they have the question. The best training comes from the person who's the most proximate to the leader when they have the question. And here's a qualifier, and it can't be you. Because there's going to be a place where you are no longer going to be humanly capable of answering every question from every leader and even fielding all of those questions. But you can create a way to do that. The best training comes from a coach, because a coach is building a relationship with the leader. The most important part of coaching is the relationship. Not always all of the right answers, not always all of the right solutions, not always the best training, not always comprehensive experience, but the relationship with an experienced leader. So the coach knows the leader, knows where they're coming from. The coach is available to the leader. So you want to have a ratio where the coach is not inundated, just like you don't want to be inundated. The coach shares their experience. They don't need to have a manual. They don't need to have all of this instruction, but there's certainly training you can do with coaches. But the first thing that the coach is going to draw from is their experience. And then the lesson is going to stick better. So if I do a training and get everybody dressed up and comes out to the church and we have this big meeting and I'm going to spend an hour talking to them about how to deal with an overly talkative person in their group. Some people may listen. Some people may take notes. Some people may pray that the training ends sooner, that the Lord comes back. I don't know how that's going to work. But the reality is, the only people in the room that are going to care about and appreciate that training, the only people that are going to find value in that training are the people that currently have an overly talkative person in their group. And the rest of them, it's going to have no value. And then we wonder why don't they come to our meetings? We're offering good training. But when does a person need training on how to handle an overly talkative person in their group? When they have an overly talkative person in their group. And yet, it's not humanly possible for you or me. I tried this. It didn't work. It's not humanly possible for you to answer the questions of every leader every time they have a question. And if they do have a question and you're the only one they can go to and you don't respond in a timely way, guess what happens? They stop calling you. They stop asking you. So the lesson sticks better with the coach, with that person that is proximate to them, that may not have the perfect answer, may not have the scholarly answer, but they have a good answer to give them when they're actually facing the dilemma. But then I hear this, but coaching is hard. Well, not unless you don't make it hard. Coaching doesn't have to be hard. We think it's hard, and then it's hard. It doesn't have to be hard. Some pastors think that groups are hard. You don't think that groups are hard. If you thought that groups were hard, you wouldn't even be at this webinar. You wouldn't even have groups, right? You wouldn't be here. But we have to be able to multiply ourselves. We have to be able to recruit leaders of leaders who are going to assist us in doing the work of the ministry. And I'm going to let you in on a little secret. If you get coaches in place, your life is going to be a whole lot easier. And you're going to be available to do other ministry, or you're going to not be so overly taxed. You're going to be able to have the time that you need for your spouse, for your family. You're going to have margin in your life. This is why you need coaches, and your leaders are going to be better served. That's why they need coaches. Think about this. Coaching is a matter of scale. So let's look at a company called Lyft. Lyft is a 5-year-old company. Lyft is a ride-sharing service. Some people like Uber. Lyft has a little better corporate culture. Uber is improving, but I like Lyft. I take Lyft when I travel. 5 years ago, Lyft had 30 employees. Today, Lyft is a $15 billion with a B, $15 billion company. How were they able to do that? They had to scale. They had to grow. Scale caused them to grow. Now, here you're talking about a company that the founders are going out, they're seeking venture capitalists, they're raising all of this money, they're hiring people, they're paying people to do all of this. And that's not typically what we do in the church. What we do is a little more challenging. Scaling is not new. This goes all the way back to Exodus chapter 18. Moses at the time was leading the people of Israel in the desert. At the time, I've gone back and researched this a little bit, there were about 3 to 3.5 million people in Israel. There were some problems. First of all, Moses' family had left him. We read the first part of Exodus 18 that Moses sent his family away to live with his father-in-law, Joseph. There's a problem when your family's left you. Number 2, Moses solved all of Israel's problems, and Jethro said, Moses, what you are doing is not good. So Moses had a couple of excuses. First thing he said was, but I'm the only one that can do it. And the second thing was, the people like coming to me. Well, let me give you a couple of insights here. First of all, if you can do it, you can train other people to do it as well. And you can ask a question. If you can solve a problem, then bring somebody else along with you who can see what you're doing and participate. And then when they're coaching a leader, they can imitate what you were doing to help that leader. The second thing is, and I'm saying this in all seriousness, and I'm not trying to be mean when I say this, is that if you need people to come to you, then you are codependent on your ministry. Moses said the people like coming to me. And it's not a good place when you do ministry because you need the ministry, you need the people, you need the church in order to feel good about yourself. And if you're in that place, then I would encourage you to go talk to someone and do some work on that, because that's not a healthy place to lead from. Now, if you're not leading because you're not sure, I mean, if you're not giving away ministry because you're not sure, well, that's another matter. Then you just need to learn some skills. But if you're leading this way because you need that to come to you, you need people to come to you, then that's a problem. Jethro's advice to Moses was this. He said, you need leaders of tens, you need leaders of 50s and leaders of hundreds, you need leaders of thousands. And only the big issues then would come to Moses. So the leaders of tens, in our context, the leaders of tens would be small group leaders. The leaders of 50s and hundreds would be coaches. And if your church only has hundreds, then this would be your leadership team. If your church is larger and you have thousands, then you would need leaders of thousands. So these would be leaders of leaders of leaders. And this would be your team, and they would have coaches. Coaches would have leaders. Leaders would have members. And so the coach would be the first person the leader calls if they had a question or they had a problem. And then if the coach couldn't answer the question, then that would go to the person that's over them, the director or whoever it is on their team, community leader. And then if that didn't work, it came to you. Or if you had a smaller church, then if the coach couldn't solve it, then that would come to you. But 90% of the things that you deal with should be able to be solved by an experienced leader. So this is the idea that Jethro had to Moses. So leaders of tens, leaders of 50s, leaders of hundreds, leaders of thousands. So really what Jethro was advising, now brace yourself, was the first pyramid scheme, right? Get it? Egypt, Israelites, pyramids. All right. So scaling your ministry. Scaling will better serve your group leaders because there'll be a person available to them when they have a question. That proximate person is where the best training comes from. Secondly, it's going to honor, empower your best leaders. You have leaders that are really good, that have good experience. You could say, you know what? I want you to work with these new leaders because I want you to rub off on them. I want them to become a leader like you. That's very honoring to your leaders. The other thing is it's going to make your job easier. And that's not bad because you have a lot of things to do. You know, I was in a place where I wear so many hats in the church, I didn't feel like I could actually be good at anything. And so you want to alleviate some of this so that you can be available to your spouse, you can be available to your family, you can be available to do a better job at what, you know, your other things that you're called to do. You're still not going to be hands off on this, but it's going to help your leaders. It's going to help you. It's going to help your family. Why not? If you cannot scale, then you become the bottleneck. And I've been in situations because of my nature to control everything. I've been in situations where I became the bottleneck, and that just slows down the whole process for everybody. Your group leaders will not be well served if you cannot scale. If you cannot scale, your life is more difficult because people are going to call you all hours of day and email you and text you with all of these problems and all of these dilemmas, and you're going to need to walk through every single issue with every single leader in every single group, and it's just not humanly possible, and it's certainly not healthy. If you cannot scale, your ministry is limited. I was talking to a pastor the other day, and the need in their church is they need to connect about 1,900 people into groups. And what I know from working with churches over the years is that it's possible in a relatively short period of time to connect 1,900 people into groups. You can find the leaders, you can form the groups. The limitation is how many coaches can you recruit and develop to meet the needs of the new leaders? That's the only limitation. If you cannot scale, you probably need to serve in a smaller church. And the reality is, even if a church is smaller, eventually it's going to grow. So I know that's a negative. I know that's a hard one. But here's the deal. You can learn how to scale your ministry. You can learn how to build a coaching structure. You can learn how to multiply yourself and better serve the needs of your group leaders and the needs of the group members. You can learn how to do this. You're not stuck. You just have to do it a little differently. The essence of coaching really comes down to this, that experienced leaders share their experience with new leaders. Experienced leaders share their experience with new leaders, and that is the essence of coaching. Adults learn by imitation, not by instruction. If they learned by instruction, they would come to your meeting, they would sit in nice little rows, you could train and train and train, it would all stick in their heads and they would go out and do it. Does that work? No, it doesn't work. If the leader's issue is outside of the coach's experience, then they're going to pick up the phone and they're going to call you, Moses. First steps to coaching. Number one, give everybody a promotion. So experienced leaders become coaches. Group members become leaders. Non-members become members. We got it. You want to start simple. Don't make this complicated. Well, what kind of training do they need? What kind of job description do they need? They don't. They don't. Well, how do I get all of my leaders into a coaching structure? You don't. Start with your new leaders only, because your new leaders are the ones that need the most help. So start with your new leaders. And here's the good news. Experienced leaders can answer new leader questions without a lot of training, without a lot of effort. Change your focus. Instead of recruiting leaders and connecting people into groups, instead of focusing on that, put your effort into coaching and training. Ask your senior pastor to recruit leaders. Well, how do you do that? Well, that's a whole other webinar. I can't get to that today. Ask your leaders to invite their group members. So the pastor recruits the leaders recruit the members. Your job is coaching and training. And the reality is that you will get much further, much faster by putting the same effort that you used to put into recruiting leaders and connecting people into groups. If you put that same effort and time into coaching and training, you're going to develop a much better system and you're going to make much more progress than you ever imagined without expending any more energy. How do you build a coaching structure? Well, number one, you could figure it out by yourself like I did. Two, you could keep coaching them by yourself, except you can't. You could convince yourself that meetings are sufficient, which they aren't, or you could follow my step-by-step course. Now, here we go. Watch this whole thing, and it's going to get it down to selling us something. Here's the thing. This is what God's called me to do for a living. And I can't do it for free because I have a wife and 4 kids that I mentioned earlier. If I did, I would. If somebody underwrote my ministry and I could do this all day for free, then I would do it. But here's the other thing that I know. I don't have put a lot of value into things that have been given to me for free. But I put a lot of value into things that I pay for. And so sometimes it's good to pay for things. When my pastor in California paid $5,000 for me to be in a coaching group, and we're not talking about $5,000 today, but when he committed to that, he committed to completely changing how we did small groups. And our church went from 30% of our adults in groups to 125% of our average adult attendance in groups, because that financial commitment meant something. All right, I'm going to make this easy for you. I've made all the mistakes already. Believe me. I've learned to avoid these mistakes. I've learned some lessons. An effective coaching structure only takes 3 to 6 months to build. The only limitation is how fast you want to build it. So I have this course. It's called Coaching Exponential Groups. It's 6 sessions that are available on video, audio download, transcript, PowerPoint. It comes with a workbook. It comes with a bunch of other stuff. The sessions are, first of all, developing your coaching structure. Second, the role of a coach. What's a coach supposed to do? Because if you don't know what the coach is supposed to do, it's very hard to recruit them. The third session is identifying and recruiting coaches. The fourth session is training your coaches. The fifth session is discipling coaches and leaders. And then the sixth session is equipping coaches. There are 3 levels of participation. I have a basic level that's a self-study course. It starts at $97. I have a pro level, which is the self-study course plus a Facebook group where we get to communicate. And then I'm doing 3 live question and answer sessions that are starting in February that we can converse back and forth. Then there's an expert level, which is everything that's in the pro level. Plus you get 3 one-on-one meetings with me, just the 2 of us. Now, if I were to pick, I would say probably your best value out of this is the middle one, the pro level, because you get some interaction with me and you get the course. So that way you do the course and you have some questions. We can do that live over Facebook. The expert level, if you just need some dedicated one-on-one time, then that may definitely be of value to you as well. If you pay in full, you get a discount for any of the 3 levels. But I want to make payments optional. So you can go to coachingexponentialgroups.com/enroll. You have to put in the www. So www.coachingexponentialgroups.com/enroll, or you can click the link down below. Building your coaching structure. This will scale to any size of church. So here's the thing. If you have a regular size church, a small church, and you build a coaching structure and your church doubles, triples, quadruples in size, guess what? Your coaching structure is scalable. You don't have to throw away what you're building now in exchange for something else. That a coaching structure that will serve 100 people, will serve 1,000 people, will serve 10,000 people, will serve 3.5 million people like Moses. So it will scale to any size. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Once you start building this, you just add to it. If you learn these skills, there is no limit to where your groups can go. Let me read it again. If you learn these skills, there is no limit to where your groups can go. If you don't learn these skills, then you are the limit to where your groups can go. When our church went from 30% of our adults in groups to over 125% of our adults in groups, the biggest limitation on the whole ministry was between these 2 ears. It was a limitation in my thinking, which led to a limitation in the way that I did things. And once I changed my thinking, once I changed how I did things, then the limitation was off and our groups rapidly expanded. You will never have more groups than you can actually manage yourself. And you probably can't manage as many groups as you think you can. I at one point had 30 group leaders reporting directly to me, and it was a disaster. So you may be better than me. All right. So if you register during this webinar, and I know you're watching this after the fact, but if you register, I will give you a bonus one-on-one session in addition to all of the other stuff that you get. So if you're interested, click on the link below and check out the Coaching Exponential Groups course. If you have any questions that you need to follow up with me, feel free to shoot me an email and I would be happy to answer your question. Thank you for your time.